Merrick had spent 7 careful years making a life that never required another person to stay. Then, at dawn, a wounded Orc Huntress staggered between his hives with an arrow in her shoulder and enough discipline to keep from frightening a single bee. Thessa reached the hill apiary on her own feet, though blood darkened the charcoal leather beneath her left shoulder. The broken shaft carried black fletching. Merrick set down his smoker, lifted both empty hands, and said, "Do not swat. The bees are curious, not cruel." She never once looked toward the road for rescue. Wind shifted. Her small tusks showed when she clenched her jaw. "I know animals." "Good," Merrick said. "Then listen to this colony." He hummed the low note rising from the nearest box until her breathing matched it. Only when the bees settled did he guide her toward the honey room. The sound gave both of them something safer than fear. Inside, furnace gold lamplight warmed shelves of jars and clean tools. Merrick cut away the ruined leather around the shaft instead of pulling blindly. Thessa watched every movement, green face pale beneath the color. "Tell me before pain," she said. "I will," he promised, and meant it. Outside, workers tapped softly against the shutter glass. Rain whispered. He braced the wound, clipped the black-fletched shaft short, and removed the barbed arrow in one steady pull. Before asking her name, payment, or explanation, he cleaned the torn flesh, pressed it closed, and sealed a beeswax and herb dressing over her shoulder with fresh linen. Her breath broke once, then steadied beneath his counting. The lamplight steadied. The black arrowhead lay on Merrick's table, washed clean, but not harmless. He pressed it into an amber beeswax latch, so no one would touch the barb. Thessa watched, then said, "I will stay tonight and guard your hives. After that, I will explain why." Hurt had become a question neither could yet answer. "Thessa," she said at last. "Ridge Patrol." Merrick gave his own name and poured willowbark tea. She explained that an adult hunter named Ven had fired at a charging boar. The shot glanced from bone, crossed the trail, and found her. "Panic bends precision," she said. Merrick believed her because shame rarely spoke that plainly. Again. When the cup stopped shaking in her good hand, Thessa described an orc custom. A healed hunter could offer 3 voluntary night watches over the healer's livelihood. The healer could refuse. It carried no marriage, mating, debt, or ownership claim. "It is gratitude with a clear ending," she said. Merrick listened for hidden pressure, and heard none at all. Merrick looked through the open door at his quiet hives. "Then I release you from it." Surprise sharpened her expression. He added, "You owe me nothing for removing what should never have struck you." Thessa studied him long enough to make the silence honest. "Release heard," she said. Refusal, he thought, should sound as simple as an open gate. She rose carefully, still taller than he was by half a head. "I may watch anyway, once I can draw breath without cursing your ancestors." Merrick almost smiled. "My ancestors deserve worse." Her laugh was brief, rough, and real. It changed the room more than the morning light did. Merrick found himself hoping she would return to insult them again. Para arrived before noon with a basket of comfrey, wintergreen, and practical disapproval. The older herbalist checked Thessa's fingers, shoulder heat, and balance. "Clean work," she told Merrick. "Annoyingly clean." Thessa asked when she could patrol again. Para answered, "Sooner if you stop pretending pain is a rumor." Merrick accepted the praise with the expression of a man fined. Ven came at sunset carrying his unstrung bow and the boar's torn black fletching in a cloth. He did not excuse the shot. "I fired scared," he said. "I hurt you." Thessa's stare remained level. "You will repair what fear damaged," she replied. "Then we discuss forgiveness." Merrick respected him slightly more for standing still beneath it. She assigned him 3 tasks: replace the split trail marker, help Merrick mend 2 failing hive boxes, and learn where the wildlife corridor crossed the shooting lanes. Ven agreed without bargaining. Merrick noticed Thessa did not seek humiliation. Accountability, in her hands, was a tool meant to build something safer. The distinctions settled into the workshop like a straightened beam. 2 mornings later, Thessa returned in a clean bandage and lighter work leathers. Merrick opened a brood box while she stood on his right, protecting the wounded shoulder. He used cool smoke, never blasting the bees. "Heat commands," he said. "Cool smoke asks them to make room." Thessa obeyed the bees more readily than she obeyed either healer. Thessa leaned close enough to hear the crowded frame. Larvae shone like pale commas in their cells. "The colony sounds impatient," she said. Merrick glanced at her, surprised. Hungry, not impatient, but close. She nodded as if he had handed her a trail sign. "Animals speak in consequences first." Merrick stored the phrase beside several truths he disliked needing. A queen had slipped from the frame. Merrick froze, searching by sight. Thessa closed her eyes. "There," she said, pointing beneath the box rim. A thin, unsettled piping answered the workers. Merrick found the queen exactly where she indicated. "You followed sound," he said. "You taught me to." For once, being known for caution did not feel like loneliness. They repaired the cracked hive body with weathered cedar, beeswax, and Ven's careful new corner braces. One-handed, Thessa held the box steady with her knee and good arm. Merrick tried to take the weight. She raised a brow. "Help is not the same as replacing me." He let go. Thessa's mouth tilted, satisfied that he had understood the boundary. At the entrance, the amber latch held the cleaned arrowhead. Thessa touched the wax beside it, not the metal. "Precision without care is only a sharper accident," she said. Merrick heard Ven stop hammering behind them. No one answered. The line did not need defending. The arrow no longer looked clean enough to excuse itself. Enough. That night, Thessa took the first watch by choice. She sat between the outer hives and the dark bear trail, spear across her knees, shoulder supported by a folded blanket Merrick left without comment. Near midnight, she found a crushed berry bush and 3 broad paw marks in damp soil. The gesture cost him his warmest bedding, and pleased him strangely. Merrick joined her with 2 cups of nettle broth. The tracks belonged to a black bear sow, and smaller prints showed 2 cubs. Thessa did not reach for her spear. "They are early and hungry," she said. Above them, the ridge grass glittered white beneath an unexpected late frost. The cub tracks turned concern into a problem with faces. Kulo arrived at dawn, gray-braided and broad across the shoulders, carrying Thessa's patrol maps. The older orc scout confirmed the frost had killed blossoms along the upper ridge. "Forage will fail for bees and bears," he said. "Different hungers, same narrowing road." Merrick disliked how neatly the sentence described his own life. The repaired fence creaked. Merrick opened 3 hives and smelled the problem before he saw it. Stores were thinning. The bees' pitch had sharpened. "We need new forage below the frost line," he said. Thessa tapped fireweed meadow on Kulo's map. "Then we plant where the corridor widens, not where it closes." Waiting, he knew, would only make every choice more expensive. They carried seed, ash, and hand tools into fireweed meadow. Thessa marked shallow curves that avoided nesting ground. Merrick mixed fireweed seed with sand for even casting, then hauled water without being asked. Kulo watched the tree line. Their work looked ordinary, which was why it mattered. By dusk, dark soil held a promise none could guarantee. Thessa's injured arm tired before noon. She hid it until her seed basket slipped. Merrick picked up the basket, not her pride, and placed it on a stump. "Tea," he said. "That sounded like an order." It was a weather report. A storm of stubbornness is approaching. She took the cup before pride could invent another task. She drank, amused despite herself. Merrick spread honey on coarse bread and cut the pieces small enough to eat one-handed. Thessa noticed the choice. "You prepare for inconvenience." "Bees punish optimism," he said. "So do ridges." She took a second piece, and the meadow began to feel less empty. He pretended not to notice how carefully she saved the last crust. The bear-safe fence required more than height. Thessa designed wide sight lines, a reinforced food-free perimeter, and an emergency exit facing the restored corridor. Merrick proposed a waxed release cord inside the first hive row. "Fast hands, no knots," he said, "even in rain." Thessa approved because the plan assumed panic instead of denying it. Enough. Ven returned with cedar posts and a new trail marker carved from the broken one. He worked beside Thessa without forcing conversation. At midday he said, "I keep hearing the shot." She drove a post deeper. "Good. Hear it until you learn before you fire. Then let the lesson become quieter." Merrick heard the apology changing shape through the sound of work. They stretched rope to test the fence line. Merrick stepped backward into a bucket and landed sitting in mud. Thessa offered her good hand. "Your danger sense is selective." Buckets are ambush predators. Even Kulo laughed, and Ven's shoulders loosened for the first time. Shared laughter made the unfinished fence resemble the beginning of shelter. Carefully. The two weakest colonies could not remain exposed near the bear trail. Merrick chose a sheltered rise beside fireweed meadow, then spent an hour listening to each box. Thessa waited without rushing him. "You are asking which one can bear movement," she said. "And which one will break if I guess." Her patience gave him room to make a careful decision. They moved the first colony at dusk. Thessa cleared the route and kept the box level with her good arm beneath one side. Merrick carried the other, feeling 10,000 lives vibrate through cedar. At every stone she called, "Step," and he trusted the word before seeing the hazard. The hive's living weight made trust impossible to pretend. Halfway up the rise, Thessa's shoulder trembled. She shifted her grip before Merrick could speak. "I know the limit," she said. "Knowing is not always obeying," he answered. She gave him a look sharp enough to peel bark, then called for a rest before the pain chose for her. The meadow held both sets of footprints. While the bees settled, Merrick checked every seam twice, then a third time. Thessa asked why his hands grew slower when another person carried weight beside him. He said nothing until silence became an answer. The old swarm accident still lived in the careful distance he kept around help. A fence bell moved once in warning. Years earlier, a colony had broken from a rotten wall during harvest. Merrick's partner panicked, and Merrick tried to manage the bees, the ladder, and the injured man alone. Both fell. The partner healed and left the ridge. Merrick stayed, convinced dependence turned one mistake into two. Nearby, the quiet hives answered them with steady softness. Thessa listened without softening the truth. "You learned that control feels safer than trust." Merrick looked toward the humming box. "It kept people from getting hurt." "It kept them from getting close enough to help," she replied. The words stung because they arrived without cruelty. cold wind moved slowly through the dark and deeply weathered cedar. They lifted again. This time Merrick named each shift before making it, and Thessa answered with the ground ahead. The second week colony reached the meadow without a jolt. When they set it down, neither claimed the success alone. Careful courage, Merrick realized, could be shared without becoming careless. Amber light warmed the room around them. That evening in the honey room, Thessa cleaned tools while Merrick rendered wax. One arm did less, but her work never became symbolic. She sorted clean linen, sharpened Para's herb knife, and labeled jars in blocky trade letters. "Your handwriting threatens livestock," Merrick said. "Only dishonest livestock." The open trail waited silently just beyond them both. On her second voluntary watch, the temperature dropped hard enough to silver the fence posts. Merrick brought a brazier but did not sit until Thessa moved her blanket aside. They listened to the hives together. "That one is angry," she whispered. "That one is always angry," he said. "We respect her boundaries." The repaired fence creaked. Kula found them at dawn sharing silence and a burnt oat cake. He examined Thessa's shoulder, then the repaired fence. "Your healer releases customs quickly," he observed. Thessa answered, "He mistakes freedom for distance." Merrick nearly choked on the oat cake. Kulo's gray brows rose with patient satisfaction. Rain tapped steadily across the low cedar roof. Later, Kulo showed Merrick how Thessa approached a frightened doe caught between fallen branches. She lowered her spear, turned her body sideways, and waited until the animal chose the open gap. No grabbing, no shouting. "Strength is sometimes the space you refuse to fill," Merrick said quietly. The meadow held both sets of careful muddy footprints. The bear sow appeared near Bear Trail at dusk, broad and thin after the failed forage. 2 cubs climbed a pine behind her, then reached for his bow, then stopped before touching it. Thessa watched the sow test the wind. "She wants calories, not war," she said. "We will not teach her otherwise." The trail opened. Kulo suggested that one clean shot could end the threat. Thessa rejected it without insulting him. "The cubs would starve, and another bear would follow the same empty trail." She pointed toward the meadow. "We open a safer route, remove the reward, and make the wrong path difficult." Nearby, the quiet hives answered them with softness. Merrick understood the logic, but feared the cost. The route would pass close to his strongest hives before bending toward the lower berry flats. "If she breaks the line, I lose the season." Thessa met his eyes. "If we close every line, she will make one through us." Cold wind moved slowly through the weathered cedar. They walked the proposed corridor from Bear Trail to Fireweed Meadow. Thessa marked trees with charcoal, never cutting living bark. Merrick noted wind direction, hive scent, and ground slope. Their professions overlapped in the narrow place where creatures chose between pressure and invitation. Neither called it romance. Amber light warmed the small room all around them. At the fence's eastern corner, Merrick built an emergency release from waxed cord and a cedar catch. The black arrowhead, still sealed in amber wax, fit the latch perfectly. Pulling it would drop a rope panel and open the prepared exit. Thessa tested it one-handed. "Pain made into passage," she said. The open trail waited beyond. The phrase unsettled him more than praise would have. The arrowhead had become proof of danger, disciplined by care, but the latch required someone to trust it under pressure. Merrick checked the cord again. Thessa covered his hand with hers. "A tool is not safer because you fear using it." Bees gathered quietly along the entrance. Para joined them in shared bee house, an unfinished cedar shelter near the meadow, and changed Thessa's dressing. The wound had closed cleanly, though strength lagged behind pride. Para ordered slower spear drills. Thessa bargained for shorter drills. Merrick learned that even formidable women negotiated like children around healers. Rain tapped steadily across the low cedar roof. "I heard that," Thessa said. Merrick looked innocent. Para did not. The older herbalist handed Thessa a jar of beeswax salve and told Merrick to stop hovering. "I am standing." "You are standing anxiously," Para replied. Thessa's grin made the small shelter feel warmer than its unfinished walls deserved. The meadow held both sets of footprints. Then arrived with iron brackets for the fence and a new quiver marked with bright white fletching. "Black vanishes in brush," he explained. "White reminds me to see where the arrow may go." Thessa inspected the stitching, then assigned him the western anchors. Consequence had become practice, not performance. A fence bell moved once in warning. While they worked, Ven apologized again, this time without asking Thessa to ease his guilt. "I will carry the memory," he said, "but I do not want you carrying my fear." Thessa tightened a bracket. "Then become the hunter who waits one breath longer." She accepted the work, not absolution. The nearby hives answered softly again. A colony split unexpectedly in the warming afternoon. Bees poured from a box and clouded above shared beehouse. Merrick's old fear tightened his chest. Thessa did not grab him or command. She stood beside him and asked, "What sound belongs to the queen?" He listened until panic separated from noise. Cold wind moved through weathered cedar. The queen's piping came from a low cedar branch. Merrick placed a clean box beneath it, while Thessa guided the branch with her good arm. He trusted her timing, and the swarm dropped in a living curtain. No one fell. No one fled. The new colony settled around the sound they both followed. The meadow darkened. Afterward, Merrick found a bee tangled in Thessa's dark braid. He asked permission before reaching. She lowered her head, and he freed the insect with 2 fingers. His knuckles brushed her pointed ear. Neither moved immediately. "Danger managed," she murmured. "Barely," he said, meaning something else. The open trail waited silently just beyond both of them. Her third watch came beneath a soft spring moon. By custom, it was the last. Merrick joined her at the fence with fresh bread and a repaired shoulder strap. He had reinforced it so the weight would rest across her back. Thessa turned the leather over slowly, understanding the attention inside the stitching. The lamplight steadied. At dawn, Merrick said, "3 watches are complete. You are free of the offer, exactly as promised." The words were correct and sounded wrong. Thessa looked toward the ridge where frost-burned forage met the hive line. "The custom is finished," she agreed. "The work is not." Rain tapped steadily across the low and weathered cedar roof. She chose to remain through the bear season because the hives and wildlife corridor needed the same protection. Merrick asked whether Kulo's patrol would object. Kulo, standing behind him with a bundle of rafters, said, "I object only to being discussed as though I am a distant counsel." The meadow held both sets of careful footprints. Kulo approved a temporary patrol base beside shared beehouse. Thessa would keep full authority over her route and schedule. Merrick would keep full authority over the colonies. Decisions affecting both would require both voices. The arrangement sounded practical. It also sounded dangerously close to the life neither had admitted wanting. A fence bell moved once nearby. They roofed shared beehouse with cedar shakes and lined one wall with hive tools. Thessa installed a spear rack beside Merrick's smoker hooks. "Your weapons make more smoke," she said. "Yours require less honey afterward." "Poor design," she judged. He laughed hard enough to drop 3 nails. Nearby, the quiet hives answered them with steady softness. Rain tested the new fence before any bear did. Water loosened one post, and the emergency panel dragged in mud. Thessa spotted the flaw, Ven reset the footing, and Merrick waxed the release cord. Their first design had failed safely, which Thessa called the most useful kind of embarrassment. Cold wind moved slowly through weathered cedar. To test the corridor, Kulo dragged sacks of crushed berries along the open route, while Merrick scrubbed spilled honey scent from the fence side. Thessa watched from higher ground, reading wind and cover. A fox followed the berry trail exactly, then vanished toward the lower flats. The plan had begun to breathe. Above, storm clouds gathered. That night, Merrick admitted he had started listening for Thessa's step outside the honey room. "It is not subtle," she said. "You walk like a gate deciding whether to open," she replied, "and you listen like a man pretending the sound means nothing." Neither denied the accusation. The open trail waited silently just beyond them both. The late frost returned for 3 nights, harder each time. Fireweed shoots survived low to the ground, but most ridge blossoms browned. Bees crowded their entrances, hungry and irritable. Merrick reduced each opening against robbers, while Thessa patrolled the fence, counting fresh bear tracks that appeared closer after every cold dawn. Bees gathered along the entrance. A strong colony began stealing from a weak one near Fireweed Meadow. Merrick used cool smoke to break the frenzy, while Thessa carried a damp cloth screen across the scent line. "Control the crowd?" she asked. "Guide the first few choices," he answered. "The rest often follow." She remembered the words. Rain tapped the roof steadily. They moved feed trays into shared bee house, away from the outer fence. Para mixed mint and bitterleaf wash to mask spilled honey, then scrubbed cedar boards until his hands blistered, then wrapped them and kept working. No one praised suffering. Merrick simply handed him a better brush and showed him the grain. The ridge wind softened. In the honey room, Thessa practiced lifting an empty queen box without favoring her injured side. Merrick watched once, then looked away when she caught him. "You may observe," she said. "You may not worry loudly." He folded linen with severe concentration. "My worry is famously quiet. It has elbows." A fence bell moved once nearby. Para warned that a spring gale would arrive before the weather broke. Pressure had fallen, swallows flew low, and bees sealed cracks with fresh propolis. Merrick began preparing travel screens for the queen colonies. His hands were exact, but Thessa saw him arranging every task so no one else would be necessary. Nearby, worker bees settled. She placed one queen box between them. "Tell me what you need from me." Merrick answered with instructions, not trust. Thessa waited. Finally he said, "I need you to choose the route if the fence fails. I need to carry without second-guessing you." The admission left him more exposed than any wound. Outside, wet cedar darkened. Thessa gave him no grand reassurance. "Then practice." She led him blindfolded through shared bee house using only spoken steps, while Kulo moved harmless obstacles. Merrick struck one bucket, cursed it as a known predator, and tried again. On the third pass, he stopped reaching for walls that were not there. Amber light warmed the small room. Near Bear Trail, Thessa found bark torn higher than her head and fresh scat filled with grass. The sow was starving enough to test unfamiliar ground. 2 cub prints circled hers. "She will come during the gale," Thessa said. "Wind will hide our scent and break her caution." The open trail waited silently just beyond them. Kulo recommended moving all strong colonies immediately. Merrick refused after reading the hives. The queens were laying, the air was unstable, and too much movement could scatter them before the storm. 2 queen colonies only, he decided. The rest stay secured. Thessa accepted his expertise without asking him to be fearless. Bees gathered along the entrance. Ven drove longer anchors into the western fence, while Kulo cleared fallen limbs from the corridor. Thessa hung cloth bundles of bitterleaf near the hive row and berry mash farther down the exit route. Merrick sealed every honey crack. They were not building a trap. They were arranging better choices under bad conditions. The wind turned. At sunset, the sow appeared beyond the rope line, nose high. Thessa stood in open view without advancing. She shifted one bitterleaf bundle so the wind carried its warning scent. The sow turned toward the berry trail, then called her cubs away. The fence had worked once, which proved only that it could. The bees settled. Merrick and Thessa ate supper on shared bee house's threshold while thunder rolled beyond the ridge. She asked whether he still believed depending on someone doubled danger. He considered the question. "No," he said. "Now I think choosing badly doubles danger." "Better," she replied. "Choose carefully, then choose fully." A fence bell moved once in distant warning. He wanted to tell her she was the careful choice. Instead, he offered the last roasted onion. Thessa split it and returned half. "Equal partnership," she said dryly, "even in onions." Merrick took the piece, aware that ordinary sharing had become more frightening than the coming storm, because he wanted it to continue. The ridge waited. They checked the arrowhead latch together. Amber wax had hardened around the clean black steel, leaving a safe grip above the barb. One pull released the eastern rope panel. Thessa made Merrick operate it twice, then reset it herself with one strong arm, and the recovering shoulder held close. Cold wind moved slowly through weathered cedar. "This hurt me because someone acted before seeing," she said. "Tonight, it may save us because we have seen before acting." Merrick looked at the arrowhead and understood its second meaning. It no longer marked only harm disciplined by care. It marked preparation shared between people, willing to answer each other. Amber light warmed the room. The gale struck after midnight. Wind hammered the cedar boxes and flattened grass in silver waves. Merrick woke on the honey room cot to the sound of a fence bell ringing without rhythm. Thessa was already at the door in storm leathers, braid tied high, spear replaced by a hooked guiding staff. Beyond them, fireweed stirred. Kulo reached the western corner as Ven ran from shared bee house carrying rope. Para stayed inside with salves, blankets, and the transport screens ready. No one waited for Merrick to command. Their plan had roles, not a hero. That truth steadied him better than the floor beneath his boots. Bees gathered quietly along the narrow entrance. A cedar post tore loose near the bare trail. The western fence sagged, then collapsed under wind and wet soil. Beyond it, the black bear sow surged forward with both cubs close behind. She smelled exposed wax, storm-shaken honey, and the concentrated promise of food in the hive row. Rain tapped steadily across the cedar roof. Thessa raised one hand, stopping Ven before he reached for his bow. "No shot!" Her voice cut through the gale. The sow swatted a hive stand, more frightened than fierce, and bees burst into the rain. Merrick tasted panic. Thessa pointed toward the queen boxes. "Move when I open the line." The meadow held their footprints. The prepared exit had jammed beneath a fallen branch. Thessa crossed the hive row sideways, keeping her body visible to the sow without challenging her head-on. She reached the amber latch, tore the arrowhead free from its wax seal, and used the clean steel point to cut the swollen release cord. A fence bell moved once. The eastern panel dropped. Wind snapped it flat, opening the corridor toward fireweed meadow. Thessa flung berry mash down the route, then dragged bitterleaf cloth behind the sow to make retreat more attractive than advance. She moved with patience sharpened into speed, guiding pressure without becoming another threat. Nearby, the quiet hives answered them with softness. One cub followed. The second scrambled beneath a tilted hive stand and became trapped between cedar rails. Its cry changed the sow instantly. She wheeled toward the sound, blocking Merrick's path to the queen boxes, then lifted his bow halfway, saw Thessa's face, and lowered it again without being told. Cold wind moved through weathered cedar. Thessa made the decisive choice before anyone else could. She handed Kulo the guiding staff, stepped inside the sow's reach, and levered the fallen stand with her recovering shoulder braced against her thigh. Pain crossed her face, but judgment never left it. "Medic," she called. "Queen boxes now!" Amber light warmed the small room around them. Merrick obeyed. He lifted the first screened queen colony and carried it along the route Thessa had created. Bees struck his veil like rain. The box vibrated wildly, yet beneath the noise he found the queen's steady piping. He followed that sound and Thessa's shouted steps instead of his old fear. The open trail waited beyond. Kulo kept the sow's attention with broad, sideways movements, never closing the escape, then hauled the loosened rail away from the trapped cub. Thessa reached under the stand, gripped the cub by loose hide and chest, and pulled it clear before the cedar frame crashed where its head had been. Bees gathered quietly along the entrance. The cub bolted toward its mother. The sow rose, huge against the storm, then dropped to all fours when Thessa backed away and opened space. "Go," Thessa said, not softly, but without hatred. Kulo swept the guiding staff toward the corridor. The bear family turned toward the berry scent. Rain tapped steadily across the cedar roof. Merrick set the first queen box inside shared bee house and ran back for the second. A roof board ripped free overhead. Para caught his sleeve, checked that he could stand, and released him. "Careful courage," she said, "not theatrical stupidity." He nodded and returned to the storm. The meadow held both sets of careful muddy footprints. The second queen box had shifted against a broken stand. Merrick could not lift it alone without crushing the entrance. Then reached him first. For one breath, Merrick almost refused. Then he said, "Take the far handle. Match me." Together they raised the colony cleanly, while bees streamed around their shoulders. A fence bell moved once. Thessa moved behind them, keeping the sow from turning back toward the honey scent. Her wounded arm weakened, so she changed technique instead of denying it, using the hooked staff against the ground and directing Kulo with precise gestures. Every choice kept the animal's exit wider than their fear. Nearby, the quiet hives answered them softly. A gust knocked Ven to one knee. The queen box tilted. Merrick held his side and trusted Ven to recover the other. "Step left," Thessa shouted. Merrick stepped before he saw the fallen post. The box leveled. Depending on someone had not doubled danger. Refusing them would have. Cold wind moved slowly through the weathered cedar. They reached shared bee house as the bear sow paused at the meadow edge. One cub pressed against her flank. The rescued cub limped, but followed. Thessa dragged the last bitterleaf bundle across the hive scent, then stepped aside. The sow chose the lower berry flats and led both cubs into darkness. Amber light warmed the room. No one cheered while the animals were still close. They listened until branches cracked farther down Bear Trail and the cubs' calls softened. Only then did Kulo lower the staff. "Route held," he said. Thessa answered, "Because everyone held their part." Merrick heard the difference and kept it. The open trail waited silently just beyond them. A final gust slammed the eastern panel against its post. The broken arrowhead lay in wet grass where Thessa had cut the cord. Merrick found it by lamplight, cleaned mud from the black steel, and closed his fist around it. The object had opened a way because she knew when to release control. The lamplight steadied. At dawn, the apiary looked battered rather than ruined. 2 stands had fallen, 3 boxes were cracked, and honey washed gold through the mud. Both queen colonies hummed inside shared bee house. Merrick pressed his ear to each screen and smiled when their familiar answering tones returned. Rain tapped steadily across the low and weathered cedar roof. Thessa sat on an overturned cedar box, while Para examined her shoulder. The wound had not reopened, but the muscles were badly strained. "You used judgment," Para said, binding it. "Then you used too much shoulder." Thessa accepted the correction because survival did not make every choice perfect. The meadow held both sets of careful footprints. Ven approached with the splintered rail he had pulled from the cub. "I lowered the bow," he said. Thessa nodded. "You saw before acting." He let out a breath that seemed weeks old. She handed him the rail. "Build the new gate stronger. That is where apology goes next." A fence bell moved once in warning. Kulo followed the bear family's trail to the lower flats and returned by noon. The sow had settled near berry thickets beyond the hive scent, and both cubs were moving. "The corridor works," he reported. "Not forever. Long enough for forage to return." Thessa considered that an honest victory. Nearby, the quiet hives answered them softly. Merrick repaired the first hive latch that afternoon. Instead of sealing the arrowhead completely inside wax, he set the cleaned black steel beneath a clear amber cap, visible but harmless. Thessa watched him work. "A warning?" she asked. "A reminder," he said. "Care must remain visible." Cold wind moved slowly through the dark and weathered cedar. For 3 days they rebuilt. Ven reset posts, Kulo widened the corridor, and Para planted bitterleaf near the food-free boundary. Thessa directed heavy work from a sling, until Para allowed light lifting. Merrick stopped anticipating every need and began asking, "What is yours and what is mine?" Amber light warmed the small room all around them. On the 4th evening, Thessa stood beside the restored fence without her sling. "My 3 watches ended before the storm," she said. Merrick's chest tightened. "I remember." She looked toward shared beehouse, then the meadow. "I am extending my stay through summer, not by custom, by choice." The open trail waited silently just beyond them both. Merrick wanted to answer too quickly, so he made himself breathe. "As patrol partner to the apiary?" Thessa's expression softened. "As equal guardian of work that protects both hives and trail. And, if you are brave enough to ask clearly, perhaps as more." His careful courage finally had a name. Bees gathered quietly along the entrance. They wrote their partnership on a cedar board, not as a contract of obligation, but as a practical promise. Shared decisions at the corridor, separate authority in their crafts, equal claim to shared beehouse, and freedom to leave, spoken aloud. Thessa signed first. Merrick signed without leaving room between their names. Rain tapped the roof steadily. Warm weather returned. Fireweed rose in bright purple ranks across the meadow, and the relocated colonies woke into abundance. Merrick opened the first hive while Thessa steadied the lid with both strong arms. The queen's calm note traveled through the frame. This time neither of them listened alone. The meadow held both sets of careful footprints. The first warm afternoon brought bees rolling over fireweed meadow in steady gold lines. Merrick and Thessa checked every relocated box, recording stores, brood, and temperament on the same cedar slate. Their notes differed in handwriting, but not purpose. Shared work had become a language neither needed to translate. A fence bell moved once in warning. Kulo approved the meadow as Thessa's continuing patrol base, provided she kept the upper ridge route open. She agreed, then added Merrick's bee paths to the map in charcoal. The apiary was no longer beside the wildlife corridor. Under their care, it had become part of the corridor's safety. Nearby, the quiet hives answered them softly. That evening, Merrick moved his spare cot into shared beehouse, then stopped at the doorway. "Only if this is ours," he said. Thessa considered the room, the tools, and the open eastern gate. "Ours when we choose it," she answered. "Never because either of us has nowhere else." Cold wind moved slowly through the weathered cedar. They sat beneath furnace-gold lamplight while rain softened the roof. Merrick admitted he wanted mornings that included her boots by the door. Thessa admitted she had begun measuring patrol distances by how soon she could return. Neither confession was yet complete, but both made completion possible. Amber light warmed the small room all around them both. Honey shone in capped comb, the season's first true surplus. Merrick cut one small square and placed it between them, but did not offer it yet. "There is something I will not hide inside work," he said. Thessa waited with the patience she gave frightened animals and stubborn men. The open trail waited just beyond them. "I love the way you make room without stepping away," Merrick said. "I love your judgment, your strength, and the fact that you never let kindness become a cage. I want a home with you, if home means two people choosing it again whenever the gate could open." Bees gathered quietly along the narrow hive entrance. Thessa's eyes brightened, but her voice stayed steady. "I love the care beneath your caution. I love that you learn to trust without becoming reckless. I want the same home, Merrick. Equal work, equal rest, and no custom standing where consent should." She held out her good hand. Rain tapped steadily across the low cedar roof. He took it. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," Thessa said, and pulled him close enough that the answer became warmth. Their first kiss was slow, certain, and brief, because bees still covered the open frame. When they parted, she murmured, "Even romance has livestock." The meadow held both sets of careful and muddy footprints. Only then did they share the first honey. Thessa bit one side of the comb and Merrick the other, laughing when amber ran over his knuckles. It tasted of fireweed, clover, and the difficult spring they had not conquered so much as guided toward survival together. A fence bell moved once, in distant but quiet warning. They closed the hive before sunset and carried the remaining comb to shared bee house. Thessa set 2 bowls on the table, then moved one beside the other instead of across. Merrick noticed and said nothing. Some choices were clearest when they did not need explaining. Nearby, the quiet hives answered them with a low, steady softness. Their first night as chosen partners was unremarkable in the best way. They checked the fence, banked the stove, argued about mug hooks, and left the eastern gate ready to open. No custom held Thessa there. No fear kept Merrick from asking her to stay. Cold wind moved slowly through the dark and deeply weathered cedar. 6 months later, shared bee house held 2 workbenches, a spear rack, a narrow stove, and mugs that never stayed on their assigned hooks. The apiary fence curved around a restored wildlife path instead of blocking it. Bear tracks passed safely beyond the bitterleaf boundary after autumn rain. Amber light warmed the small room all around them. Para kept salves on the left shelf and complained when anyone moved them. Then maintained the white-fletched trail markers and waited one breath longer before every shot. Kulo used the beehouse table for patrol maps, though he claimed the honey cakes had no influence on his route planning. The open trail waited silently just beyond them. Thessa patrolled at dawn and returned to inspect brood frames with Merrick by afternoon. Her shoulder had healed strong, marked only by a narrow scar beneath charcoal leather. Merrick still checked Storms twice, but now he handed her the second list instead of hiding it in his pocket. Bees gathered quietly along the narrow hive entrance. The first hive they tended together stood at the meadow edge, its latch glowing amber under soft spring blue sky. Inside the wax cap, the black arrowhead gleamed harmlessly. Fireweed purple surrounded the cedar box, and bees crossed the open corridor without knowing how much human and orc care protected it. Rain tapped the cedar roof steadily. Merrick touched the latch, then Thessa's hand. The object that had wounded her now opened nothing unless both of them chose. She smiled toward the hives and the trail beyond. Home, Merrick understood, was not a wall against danger. It was a gate built wisely and opened together. The meadow held both sets of careful footprints. If Thessa and Merrick's careful partnership stayed with you, tell us this. Would you have trusted the bare corridor, or moved every hive before the storm? Subscribe to Greenheart Frontier for more adult frontier romances where practical kindness, hard work, and brave choices turn lonely places into warm homes. Until the next trail, may your courage be careful and your door open by choice.